I was just a participant in war, and I felt that more or less what I was doing at the time was, fighting against evil, fighting against terrorism. And then throughout the deployments and then kind of more time reflecting back, you realize you're more of a participant in the overall evil of war.
In a powerful poem, a combat veteran looks back and questions the inevitability and unavoidable nature of evil in warfare.
Well, to me, that was not even a consideration of myself or my safety or anything. It was something that needed to be done. The situation was there, and there was never a hesitation about harm to myself. Now, when you think back on it, it was stupid.
And in a firefight in Vietnam, a young gunner leaves his chopper to give a downed friend one final act of kindness. Hello, welcome to the Mighty Pen Podcast. I'm David L. Robbins, your host and founder of the Mighty Pen Project, a writing program for veterans and their spouses in partnership with the Virginia War Memorial Foundation here in Richmond, Virginia. In the Mighty Pen Podcast, we don't feature a lot of poetry, but this one piece, Mythology on the Mountain, by former Army Captain Dustin Dunbar, set off a memorable discussion one night in class with Ron Bland, who served with the U.S. Army in Vietnam from 66 to 68. Ron's service left him disdainful of a later brand of warrior. In today's podcast, we bring Ron and Dustin together to talk about war across generations. First, let's listen to Grief, movingly read by David Bridgewater. Following that, an interview with author Ron Bland.
We are flying high and fast this morning in our newly hopped up D model Huey that we call the Wreck. Wrecked and retrieved twice. Has more patches on it than your grandmother's quilt. Spec 4 Horton from the engine shop has voided the warranty on this bird by tampering with the governor, giving us more power to get the hell out of Dodge faster and lift us out of ungodly small holes in the jungles. The downside is that it could tear the airframe apart. We'll take that chance to get out of a hot LZ faster rather than bouncing along the ground trying to get enough airspeed to lift off. We're all grinning with a what the fuck running through our heads because we know that damage is unavoidable. Just before dawn, we're hustling to get in the air. The temp is coming up from a bitter cold night to another stifling, hot, humid day. I am in the starboard side jump seat with Owen Cat filling the same seat on the other side. Our 60s stand between our knees with 100 round belts of ammo already stitched together. Now, with altitude and speed, I try to make myself fit in as tight into this corner of the bulkhead behind the co-pilot as I can to keep from freezing to death. Owen Cat wears his poncho liner like a ceremonial robe from back on his reservation in North Dakota. Owen Cat is just a wisp of a man, and his naivete makes him fun. He never misses a chance to tell you how his people kicked our ass at Little Bighorn. Unfortunately, if there's a black man around, he turns into a gawking idiot. He can't believe they actually exist, saying he has never seen nor heard of one. Thank goodness for me and all aboard, he is a savage warrior with the ability to see camouflaged enemy positions and call them out faster than the rest of us. Now, if I can just get him to understand the sights on the weapons we use, let's just say he's better at throwing rocks than shooting a weapon. Because of the constant movement of the ship, we are mostly pointing and shooting, making even Owen Cat effective in the LZ. With only my will to keep from freezing, I focus on our 45-degree single wind formation that lets us fly faster and save fuel, but is difficult for the pilots to hold. Shivering in the corner, I distract myself by judging each pilot for his skill at holding his position. Some lag back, others constantly change altitudes, and still others are unable to maintain a steady speed. I grow numb from the cold and vibration, along with the rhythmic slapping of the blades through the air and the high-pitched whine of the turbine and transmission. Tension builds as we start the final approach. The pilots get focused and ready, believing they are invincible in their armored seats and chicken plates. As we approach the LZ, a squelch bangs in our headsets. Then I hear, 5 clicks out, 3 birds at a time in the LZ, starting with the axe murderer, then Waco, then RIP. The rest of us will fill the hole as the first birds leave. Again, a squelch. Wounded on the ground, ammos and C's out. Wounded on. If our gunships can hold the perimeter long enough and stay on the fucking ship, I'll leave your ass if I have to. Okay, guys, show me that shit you bullshit about all the time. Those bastards are never going to let it go that I left the ship 2 months ago to get the last trooper 10 meters out. We climb to 2,000 feet and circle the LZ, waiting to make our run into complete chaos. Purple smoke that marked the LZ is trapped under the canopy, concealing the heavy firefight and the gunships dumping their whole load of rockets into the surrounding jungle. Waco's tail boom wags slightly. He pulls pitch and pulls out of the LZ. We all gasp as green traces appear to cover his whole ship. I freeze. Then I let go, realizing I'm holding my breath. Seconds later on the intercom, on final now. My best guess is we're at 60 knots, 50 feet above the trees. This could be close to a disaster. Just as that thought crosses my brain, the whole ship starts to shudder and shimmy, falling from the sky and lands with a hard jolt and a bounce, almost throwing Owen Cat out. Owen Cat and I lay down suppressive fire. Both our M60 barrels are glowing red and drooping. We grab our M16s and burn through 20 magazines each, sending hot brass all over the ship and down the co-pilot's back. Enemy rounds come out of the tree line, blowing up a mist from the wet foliage that looks like puffs of smoke, identifying the targets for us. Even when you're in the shit, sometimes good shit happens. Mortar rounds so close they buffet our ship, and AK rounds make a slapping ping as they hit our fuselage. The gunships have opened the gates of hell on earth with their miniguns and rockets. Leaves, bark, tree shards fly. Both sides hunker down, waiting for the chaos to subside. Owen Cat calls out targets. It's working like textbook this morning. Then I spot a soldier in the middle of all this crap. Cherry Boy from Infantry Basic. His legs are gone, and he looks as if his insides are leaking out. We couldn't save him, even if he was on the operating table now. Cherry Boy's the only creature on Earth I know or have heard of with no belly button. I don't know how many times he has been naked on a bet to prove it. I don't think he's ever bought beer or cigarettes with his own money. I can't leave him, and I certainly can't leave him alone. A morphine syringe is stuck in his web gear. We leave the empty syringe stuck in our web gear to prevent overdoses. I could take that out and throw it away and hope someone comes along and gives him a second dose of morphine that would surely end his pain. Or I could help him. I can't send him home like this, with my heart telling me I must help and a sense of defiance telling me the pilot will wait that extra couple of precious seconds. I jump and run. I can feel and hear rounds buzzing near. Some troops are putting cover fire down for me as I kneel in front of him. His lips move, but nothing comes out. I calm myself, trying to read his lips. Tears stream down my face. He keeps mouthing, "Mom, Mom." I kiss his forehead, tell him that he'll be okay. I'll let his mom know. He'll be along soon. Unable to summon the courage, I throw my unused syringe away and run for my ship. I tell the pilot to break right out of the LZ, putting Cherry Boy directly in front of me. With 6 wounded, we gain altitude and airspeed. I send out a 3-round burst from my heart. Close my eyes. And we head to the medical pad at Pleiku.
I'm joined by Ron Bland, the author of Grief, Vietnam veteran. Ron, thanks for coming in. Question. You describe Cherry Boy as having no belly button, and Owen Cat as being an indigenous American who had never seen an African American. Before we get into the meat of that powerful story, describe for me the kind of polyglot that Vietnam was. I mean, these are characters that you don't encounter anywhere maybe but in the military.
Well, we were thrown in with each other from all points in the United States, all different ethnic groups and languages. And so you have a Puerto Rican with a slang, New York slang. We had Owen Cat from North Dakota and a guy from Oregon. His name was Gene, and O'Donnell from Iowa. And it was, everybody immediately had a nickname. And it might be related to your name or where you were from or what kind of job you did in civilian life.
Your nickname was?
I honestly can't remember.
Huh.
Most people call me RB.
And now, grief is about compassion. It's also about an unbridled look at the terror that can swallow up a situation. You jumped off that chopper twice to do a brave thing for a downed soldier. Describe, if you can, what was going through your head both times to leave your post and go out into the shit.
Well, to me, that was not even a consideration of myself or my safety or anything. It was something that needed to be done. The situation was there, and there was never a hesitation about harm to myself. I had seen plenty of other people jump out to get somebody without any serious ramifications, so the fear was just not a part of it. It was just, this needs to be done, and I was there to do it.
Churchill famously described courage as fear that waits 1 minute.
And I truly believe that. Now, when you think back on it, it was stupid.
Yeah, there's some whiskey tango foxtrot moments.
Right.
So talk to me about your approach to memory. Now, we know each other well. You've been in several classes. You've written several beautiful pieces, many of which we'll hear in this Mighty Pen podcast as the months roll on. But talk to me about your sense of yourself as a veteran. I know you, Ron, that you take a very humble approach and that you don't ever want to be viewed as a singular and heroic, more so than I think most veterans I encounter. But tell me your approach on memory and your approach on living today with that memory.
I had to go back when I got out of the service and I came home and I got on an elevator. When I got on, everybody in the elevator car got out. Never struck me as funny, but never a consideration. But when I got home, I also went in an apartment building and got on an elevator and people got out. And I didn't get it, and finally I was telling another veteran, what happened, only because he was the only one I could relate to. My old friends kind of fell by the wayside, or somehow I didn't fit in their group anymore, or they didn't fit in mine. So I didn't have a group then. Until one day I was in a 7-Eleven, 10 miles from my apartment. In comes this guy that I served with in Vietnam. And, we had a 5-minute pat on the back session to each other, and out the door we went, and I haven't seen him again since. But it took me over the hump of coming home, that other veterans that were there the same time I was are home. We're getting by, however, or to us it was not a big deal, really. I mean, coming home was just like, oh, thank God we get to go back to work and make some money. Of course, there was always the phone calls. Some other veteran would clear across the state in Arizona or California would call and wanting to drink beer over the phone, so to speak. And the next thing you know, your phone is ringing. He hangs up and the phone, another veteran's calling because now there's a chain going at veterans that you serve with. And that could go on for, an hour. But beyond that, there was nobody asked me how my time in service was. They didn't ask me what I did. I didn't tell them because they wouldn't believe it anyway. I was like probably a lot of veterans just out there alone. So I went to work and never stopped working.
Where are you today with memory?
Oh, sad.
Yeah.
Yep. It's just as raw to me today as the day I left. I don't think that'll ever change, and I don't want it to change.
I know that you reach out to other veterans, that you're very big-hearted about them almost more than you are for yourself. When you discuss other veterans, when you write about other veterans in the class, you have such compassion for them, compassion for yourself.
Well, I spent, I'm going to say 5 years in therapy.
Mm.
A lot of one-on-one, in the office kind of thing. And then it went into video therapy in groups. And I hate it, and I thought it was wasting my time and made me feel like a sissy. I just, it wasn't for me. But I hung in there because I liked the therapist. I would have done anything for her. But eventually, it kind of was grinding me down to fit in the mold of a citizen that wasn't emotionally crippled.
I'm glad to hear that. Ron, the opportunity to write stories like grief and have them on this podcast and to, I guess, testify alongside other veterans and to have that community, has that helped to be able to put it in writing?
Helped my ego. It helped my ego because I never thought I could write anything. I don't even know why I signed up for that class. I signed up because I had nothing going on, and I'm thinking, you have stopped learning. You need to learn something else. You need to, keep learning. And I had just retired from work too, so that was a big part of it. And I was volunteering at the VA hospital in the hospice area.
Mm.
So veterans were a big part of my life because 3 days a week or 4 days a week, I was at the VA hospital volunteering. I think that's the biggest thing that helped me more than any therapy session. To meet and greet those other veterans coming in the front door, and then seeing all the disabled veterans with prosthetics and helper dogs, it just made me feel like, God, you need to straighten your act up and help somebody else, instead of whining and crying about yourself. And I didn't exactly whine and cry, but I lived in the corner of the room all the time.
Ron, thank you for coming by. Stick around a little while. We're going to do another interview with you in this episode alongside Dustin Dunbar.
Thank you.
Yeah, man. Next, Dustin Dunbar will read his extraordinary poem, Mythology on the Mountain. Following that, Ron will join me and Dustin for a remarkable conversation about war, warriors, and life.
I wish I had lost a limb. At least, that's what we all said. Lost a leg or an arm, something to show off at the bar. Been blown up in a Humvee, hit by an RPG, rather than the acrid smoke of tire fires, shit buckets filling my lungs. Rather have the ghost ache than the constant sweat of having my back turned against the screams. Rather than the shame of shaking hands, bearing the grin, thanks for killing the kids. Of some unknown man, woman, dropped on by bombs. Overhead, hear the roar, the ringing in my ears, feel my chest implode. But it's okay. It's over there. Don't bring it home. I wish I had lost a limb to earn the worship. Instead, I only died over there. Did you shoot anyone? The look of disappointment when I answer. Paid for my drink, looking for a cool story, a way to connect, say they'd trade places. Wish I could unload all of the above, this full magazine of despair and inapt hope, but just a number, feeding the machine, visiting violence on unsuspecting dreams, bringing all class of supply to some oppressor Liber, more like Eichmann in my own Jerusalem, but held on a pedestal for nothing special, no one else willing to play taps for my soul. Yet you set me there, complicit in our destruction, sedated by stories, never smelling the foul air. Can't wake from your dream that keeps me from sharing the nightmare.
I'm joined by Dustin Dunbar, the author of Mythology on the Mountain. Dustin, I want to ask you about one specific line in there, and then I'd like you to talk about the poem overall, but I'm always moved by that particular line, like Eichmann his own Jerusalem. Interpret that for me and for the listeners.
Yes, I think really the general theme of that poem for me was kind of along the lines of Hannah Arendt's Banality of Evil. I was just a participant in war, and I felt that more or less what I was doing at the time was, fighting against evil, fighting against terrorism. And then throughout the deployments and then kind of more time reflecting back, you realize you're more of a participant in the overall evil of war. And so looking back, Eichmann in Jerusalem really resonated with me about how people not realizing that they are participants can still be participants in overall evil. And I was trying to reckon with that and reckon with my own place in the world and in the global war on terror.
I wish I'd lost a limb. What a remarkably powerful way to start a poem. Take me through that. Why was that the place that you launched off of into that poem? I wish I'd lost a limb.
A lot of times coming back from war whole and being thanked for my service, and you see a lot of almost glorification of people coming back maimed, losing arms, legs, having prosthetics, burn marks from IEDs. And so it felt like coming back whole and a little bit of survivor's guilt of not earning the worship that I was receiving at the time when I did come home.
And that's a great segue to a real remarkable moment we have here in the studio for the Mighty Pen podcast. We're joined by Ron Bland, the author of the story we heard earlier, Grief, and Dustin Dunbar, two warriors from two very different generations, yet bound by the kind of infinite bonds of having been soldiers in combat. A great commonality and a lot of differences. Ron, thank you for joining us again. And I want to take you back to about a year and a half ago. Ron and Dustin were in the same Mighty Pen classroom. And Dustin brought in Mythology on the Mountain. And we had read it, and we were discussing it in class. And we all agreed, of course, it was a powerful piece. And Ron, I'm going to paraphrase for the purposes of efficiency. Ron said to the class and to Dustin in specific, and I will say in 8.5, 9 years of running the Mighty Pen classes, Ron, I've never heard a statement that I found this remarkable and this moving for me personally. When you told Dustin that until this moment you had had a kind of disdain for Dustin's generation of warrior and his war, juxtaposed to your own experiences in Vietnam. And Ron, if you'd pick it up right there, and if you could tell us and tell Dustin again what you said, and then I'd like you two gentlemen to have a discussion about it. Please, Ron.
When Dustin said he was a Middle Eastern veteran, the immediate thing that shot through my head was, oh God, here's another one. I'm the one that fought the damn war. You guys are over there riding around in the desert, got McDonald's and base camps. How can that be a war? And after Dustin presented that poem in class, I read that poem and I thought, shit, selfish, man, or I want to say bitch, selfish bitch. He experienced everything you did, in a different environment, still a war. And I was also resentful that the Middle Eastern veterans were getting all these accolades, and meanwhile they're still talking about My Lai and burning babies and shooting civilians in Vietnam. 50 years later, I was resentful. But like I say, after reading his poem, it just opened a new page, chapter in my life or outlook. And I realized that it was the same difference as my dad probably thought about me when I went to Vietnam. Well, it's a little conflict. It's not like the war he was in. All of a sudden, it just struck me how selfish I had been and understanding of what war was like in the Middle East. And I was truly grateful for Dustin's poem. I mean, it served all the Middle Eastern veterans well to read that poem.
I appreciate that, Ron. I think in any aspect, anybody that writes anything, the goal ultimately is to reach through space and time to reach somebody and connect with your emotions and the truth that you're trying to put pen to paper. And so when you said that in class, I teared up. I knew from just reading your short poems and what you were attempting to write through grief, what you had gone through. And it was just this attempt of my own to reach you through our common bonds of having gone through something, while not similar in the type of war it was, but similar in the fact that it was war.
Do you guys, I'm sure you do, believe there's a commonality to all warfare, that humankind can only do it one way, and that's with the scars that follow? Talk to the veterans that are listening to this broadcast and reach out to them, Ron and Dustin, the way you guys reached out to each other, could you?
50 years later, after Vietnam, I retired from work. Now, all of a sudden, a guy that worked 6 or 7 days a week, all of his life, to actually avoid any kind of criticism about being a Vietnam veteran. I had no understanding of Dustin's war, but when he read that poem, I was floored that we were the same, exactly the same. Different battleground, but the same emotions. And I'll be forever grateful to Dustin for putting that out there, because I could have gone on forever being jealous of all the publicity that Middle Eastern veterans got and the sympathy they got. Actually, there was also an old Korean veteran that I waited in the waiting room with him several times at the VA clinic, and he would start talking to me and telling me about Korea. And I told him I didn't know anything about Korea. I lost an uncle there, but I didn't know anything about it. Well, his story was the same as mine, and then I realized it was the same as Dustin's. I guess more than anything, this white-haired 90-some-year-old veteran and Dustin showed me the light that, get over it. War is bad, and they're all the same.
Yeah, to echo on your point, Ron, I think one of the toughest things I've had to deal with was just talking about it. I know it's easy for veterans to kind of look at each other, and there's a kind of innate recognition of what someone else has been through. Sometimes it's not there, but I think the one thing that I've always struggled with was talking to people that weren't there, that are civilians. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that there is an experience deep within and scars and rifts very deep that are hard to express. And I had trouble even talking to my own wife about it. And honestly, this class, the Mighty Pen Project, and writing the poems and the stories has really helped me kind of partition that part of myself and put it out there so that others can hopefully understand and kind of get after it. And it's always been difficult to do, but honestly, writing has helped me better communicate that. And it's almost through my writings that I've been able to talk to my own wife and my kids about it.
And I can attest to that my wife knew nothing about my service until I started writing. I had written a piece years ago that was published in a local newspaper. That was the first glimpse that my wife had of my service, period. probably the first glimpse that I really let out to anybody. So I saw the Mighty Pen. I actually wrote a story about volunteering at the VA in the hospice care, and they all cheered over that and told me I needed to put it in the Veterans Magazine. I forgot what it's called, but and I thought, yeah, okay, you're just you know placating me here. I decided that maybe I could write something worthwhile. I didn't know what. I wasn't doing anything else. I signed up and came to the class and met Mr. Robbins unfavorably, unfavorably, but he has since won me over, charmed me, uh, and I was able to write a piece of work, a story that was more telling than I, I ever knew. It was actually information that was suppressed, and I think even now I feel like it should have been suppressed. But when I reread that story, it's extremely moving to me today. And I'd like to write more stories like that. So it's the reason I'm signing up for the next class.
Yeah, and I'm glad you didn't suppress that story, Ron, because I think about the ending of your story, Grief, with the 3 shots from the heart, and that hits home. It really does, and I love it. I love that piece, and I'm glad you shared it.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, I personally thank you, and you honor me to let me have been your teacher. Ron, Dustin, Dunbar, thanks for joining us in the studio.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
The Mighty Pen Project is a free writing program for military veterans offered by the Virginia War Memorial Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit. If you'd like to learn more about the Mighty Pen or sign up for one of our writing classes on Zoom, or just send us your thoughts, email us at mpodcast@vawarmemorial.org or use the link in the podcast description. If you want to read today's stories and many more, use the link to go to the Mighty Pen archive. And if you enjoy the podcast, please share it. Music for this episode was provided by Miles Black from the VCU Arts Department of Music. If you'd like to support the Mighty Pen, follow the charitable donation link in the podcast description. I'm David L. Robbins, and I want to thank you for listening to the Mighty Pen Podcast. It's an honor